Yeah, I think there's a few reasons why it's so hard to actually land village in North America. One is that the culture here is so divorced from village culture, village relationships, village thinking and seeing that it's just like we don't know how to do it. So people import their normal ways of doing things and ways of relating into something that's supposed to look like a village. But the village is very much a mindset and not only an infrastructure.
Yeah.
Like for example, like the tenements in New York City in the 1880s, like those replicated villages in a lot of ways. Everybody came from some, village in Italy or Greece or something like that, and they all came, or Ireland, and they all came, and they had the relationships, everybody knew each other on that block, and their cousins and their second cousins, and like they had some kind of village culture. So another thing is so that's one. Mm-hmm. Another, then, like on the systems level, we live in such a delocalized, globalized economy that if you get together in a village, there's still that question in the back of everyone's mind, well, why are we doing this? Like, I don't really need you to survive in the same way that you need everybody in the village to survive. So how much of a real community can you have when everybody in the back of their mind is like, well, I don't need you. I could just leave here and go make my living somewhere else.
Because the interdependence isn't really honestly there.
Right. It's not real interdependence. Yeah, I'm going to like chop your wood for you and you can help me fix my sink. But, like I could hire a plumber. Maybe I don't have enough money to do that. And when people are poor, financially poor, then they do start to have more community. Mm-hmm. But the habits and the aspiration to be able to pay for everything, that's really deeply ingrained.
So it starts to come to question, do we need a crisis to actually return us back to the urgency of that? Like where many people are second and third generation removed from the village and from their villages. And here we have like an alternative living happening, but everybody who shows up comes with a mainstream, for the most part, background, and then kind of holds on to that when it gets scary or out of the comfort zone of actually really trusting each other, and it becomes more like a real estate purchase perhaps in ways of living then. So do we even imagine that there's a possibility that people can transform themselves from that one level to where we need to go to, at least in our personal lives?
Yes. So in order for there to be real village, the people who come in from North America are going to have to sacrifice something. Sacrifice some of the barriers that keep us separate from each other. So then the question is, why? Why should I sacrifice those things? What do I sacrifice them to? If not, we need each other to survive. It has to be something else, something that you care about more than those things. That's why the village, the eco-villages, or the intentional communities that really work are where there is a common unifying vision, purpose, could be religious even, that people care about so much that they're willing to sacrifice their comfort and their habits, their psychological comfort, and to get real with each other and stay there when the conflicts inevitably arise. Like everyone can be nice to each other for a while, and then the conflicts arise. And why are you going to stay?
Right.
Why are you going to stick it through? Well, if there's something that you care about so much, even more than your self-image or more than your comfort, then maybe you'll stick it through, especially if there are some kind of social technologies that can facilitate the breakthroughs in conflict.
Can you name what that is in your mind that you think is big enough for people, especially the North American kind of Western cultured peoples? And I'm not counting First Peoples in North America when I say that, but can you even put a name to that yet?
It could be many things. I mean, it could be land healing. It could be, on a short time scale, it could be like a music festival or something like that. Sports teams and drama troupes and groups like that, they have really strong community. Until
it comes to raising our kids together, and then, suddenly I found out I have a different vision than you, or my retirement pension maybe is
well,
now
that could be it too, though.
questioned at being at risk. Oh,
that could be a vision, like we want to raise our kids in a really beautiful way. And if there's some common agreement about what that beautiful way is, you can have community built on that too. And those communities then often kind of dissolve when the kids have grown up and they don't want to come back. So there has to be something more than that.
And here we call ourselves our eco-villages, one united resource. It means we each bring a contribution. We're each bringing something. It also means we're all super different. And so even when you have shared language of a vision and a mission and a business plan and a strategic plan and all those, like we've got this dialed, still then our individual personalities, personal histories, cultural wounding, all of our trauma seems to come like cream to the surface when we live together.
Right. And traditional cultures, like they weren't without conflict.
Right.
You know, I mean, it could get intense.
Yeah.
So you have to have ways to handle that. And
work it.
The way that we're taught in school, for example, is you report to authority. You tell on somebody.
Right.
Like you appeal to authority to resolve your conflict. That doesn't make for a very good eco-village. You could do it that way. You can have like an autocratic leader. And those actually can be stable as long as the leader,
communities.
As long as the leader is still around.
Yeah.
Those can work. I'm not like saying that is necessarily bad.
Yeah.
But there's got to be a better way to do it and to train ourselves, to acculturate ourselves to a different kind of society. So there's one more reason, actually, I think why North America is especially difficult for eco-villages is zoning and building codes. Like I know people in like Brazil, Central America, like they make eco-villages and they can do whatever they want.
Right.
Composting toilets, and wastewater recycling and like, I mean, earth houses, et cetera, et cetera. They don't have to deal with so much of that kind of stuff. And even if the either building codes don't exist, or you can slip somebody a small bribe and get past it.
Yeah.
Yeah. So North America is really hard. Like all of it's like the culture of separation translates into a legal system that makes it really hard.
It's fractured.
To do anything but what is normal.
Right.
Yeah.
Or not normal. And it's curious here because we kind of thought like, what if we tried to crack that nut? We didn't realize how big the nut was. But okay, we're going to take on the zoning. And we went to our local officials and said, we want to volunteer. We want to help you. We want to help make this legal. We didn't know it was illegal to live sustainably. And weirdly, after 2.5 years, we created a land use zoning that set a precedent in Canada. Yeah. And then we took on creating a new hybrid organization, basically permaculturalizing the legal structures. We created a finance way to mortgage. We created and worked with the building codes, and everything you see here is permitted and engineered. In fact, those guys started teaching here and actually helping other people understand how to replicate it or do this and get over kind of our power dramas of working with regulatory authorities and just being people together. Yeah. And, we took on a green burial project. We've done all kinds of wild and wonderful, our wastewater, our legal composting toilets, everything. And again, those guys teach here. And what we're left with now that we did everything that is the greatest barriers is the human and social dilemma of it all. Still is the challenge to sustain. To actually, like even now, we can absolutely say we've removed those barriers, but still to get the human trust level and the cohesion, like there's no how-to book that's going to get us there. Now what?
Well, thank you for doing that precedent-setting work. Like, because once it's been done in one place, then other people can say, well, they did it in Victoria. It makes it a lot easier to persuade local officials in other places. Yeah. So that's really important.
And the truth is, somebody else did a whole bunch of those pieces. Like we're not such superheroes that we can't not notice that we borrowed this from all over the world, brought it in, proposed it, crafted it further to make it locally relevant. But the fact that we put together so many precedents all into one ecosystem is what makes this unique in North America. Makes us the lawful permaculture site.
Right. Yeah, that's fantastic.
Yeah. It's pretty fun. It's been amazing because you never think you can, and you do, and you try, and then it happens, and it's kind of like, how far can you go?
Right.
What else can you create as possible?
So now there's an opportunity for the dysfunction of the social and psychological zoning laws to rise to the surface.
Right.
And
that's awesome.
Yeah. And like there are places that have developed technologies and practices to deal with that.
Mm-hmm.
You know, like I've spent a little bit of time at Tamara,
right,
where they have this forum process that's like the real shit. I mean,
mm-hmm.
it is like nothing is out of bounds, and you basically, I mean, this is probably not 100% true, but it's very hard to maintain any kind of secret or unexamined shadow that will not be revealed.
Nowhere to run, nowhere to hide.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
And like, I'm not saying it's perfect, but I feel like it has to be at that level of abnormality.
Right.
Taking the normal of our default culture, like it has to be pretty like extreme, pretty intense for it to be different than it.
And so many different people have come from Tamara and trained up there and are trying to replicate that here,
mm-hmm.
and yet it's not getting its solid grounding underneath it yet.
Yeah.
And it makes
you
wonder,
can't replicate
do we need elders? Do we need?
I don't think you can
how do
replicate
we create?
it. You have
how
to
do we create
translate
that culture of like deep integrity around the openness and the compassion and the love, really, mm-hmm. That's kind of not held off into some kind of marketed structure, or,
mm-hmm.
A lot of kind of workshopping it sort of things,
right.
but a really deeply lived process. And it seems like that's the great challenge of North America, to dive in that deep.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't think you can replicate it really, but you can translate it. Mm-hmm. And the translation process is messy. The translation process might start with trying to replicate it, and that didn't work.
Yeah.
And now what? And like really staying in the crucible.
Yeah. And we're a culture of levers.
Yeah.
And how do we become stayable and count-onable with ourselves, that we're actually in our lives? We track all of our time of what we do here. Like we had time sheets, and because mm-hmm. we're a nonprofit, we're trying to be responsible to foundations and really say what's going on and what something is really like, how much value has gone into that, how much love hours has gone into mm-hmm. creating that thing. And then we realized, this is not a good idea, because people are so connected to what work means.
Right.
That is just like mass craziness when mm-hmm. you're trying to have people live and work together, because work has a not positive cultural context for like 99% of the people who walk in here. We try and have life sheets now, so we're not off life. We might be taking some downtime, so we're not in direct, constant mm-hmm. connection, and so we're like stopping the connection for a little bit and having what other people might call a day off, or an evening off. But to actually keep staying fully in our lives, to not just go off to the couch or the bar mm-hmm. and stop being present and being engaged. Mm-hmm. And that's a practice here, but it's, unless there was a container, like really solid people being able to hold that all the time, the container breaks constantly. Mm-hmm. And that seems to be our fear now for North America, is where and when and how will we be able to create the containers that can hold that crucible? Because just a few people being able to fully show up on that level, there'll be a break in the bowl sooner or later. And how to even imagine picking ourselves all up. And in the First Nations culture here, people are stood up. And that means, like, no matter what happens in your life, your people are behind you. That's your community. And when you're down on your knees, they stand you up. Mm-hmm. And it's like a form of honoring, to say, you know who you are. Mm-hmm. We're with you. And it seems like that has to be something that the other North Americans, that we could all learn from. That if we all stood together, we actually would create that kind of container. Yeah,
and then the question comes up, what are the conditions for that to happen?
Yeah.
Like, I'm not sure if it's something that you can just strive for,
Right.
but it can be. I think like witnessing the example of it can spark something.
Yeah. And I think we get some percentage of the way there here at our eco-village, and yet we're very seasonal. We've been so inclusive that there's a river of people come through, and with that river, when it goes out in the fall, it pulls a lot and kind of pulls stuff in the river along with it.
How many people are permanent here?
Never more than 15 to 20 and our good kind of solidness. And then we had 75 volunteers this year that stayed for a month or more. Mm-hmm. And then we have, a week long of 150 people, and everybody has their idea of what should be happening here. Every day, you saw it this morning, we can recreate our whole reality with the next new person who shows up.
You see, with like 15 or 18 people, I mean, really, it's more like a retreat or education center than it is a real village.
Right.
And you have community among the staff of the education center, which is not a bad thing. There's nothing wrong with an education center, but it's not really a village.
Right.
A village does not have people just migrating in and out all the time.
Yeah.
So if you wanted to be more of a village, the first question to ask is, why do we want to be more of a village? Are we trying to make it something that it isn't and doesn't want to be? Like, to get honest with yourself. Why are we doing this? Who are we? Who are we meant to be? What is calling us the most strongly?
Yeah.
And to circulate that question in the core group. And then, if it does become clear that, we want to move toward real village, then you have to expand, which involves both physical and social infrastructure changes.
That's been our barrier, is we actually showed up fully for the wider community and serving the greatest good we possibly could, and we didn't build ourselves homes. Mm-hmm. Even though we could, we did everything else to allow for everybody else to come here, and arguably that might be one of our greatest downfalls and with children, we're not really looking after ourselves as families and as a core community. So some of our main folks, like, how long can you live in an RV or a yurt, especially on the wet coast?
Right.
So now it's kind of like the question becomes, do we stop? Like, close the gate. That's a constant last 5 years. Close the gate, or narrow the driveway. But to actually take time to build relationship, it's like a couple. You can get absorbed into everything else, and your couplehood or your family life gets diluted into... I
mean, Tamara closes down. They run no programs for half the year.
Right.
Or more.
Yeah.
And it's all about, deepening community.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think that might be the thing in North America, is because there is so much like desire to have social enterprises and all these things, or people don't really want to, it's curious here, people would be interested in paying less than they would pay for market rental anywhere else, or less to buy a house. Like, if you bought a house anywhere on this street, it's $750,000. But if you were to build a cob house that's very beautiful and so on, there's a challenge for people like getting up to $100,000.
Right.
And it's just so contextually out of whack around how we value things. Like, this is the quintessential affordable housing possibility. And yet there's this weird thinking about something being worth something less because I have to put up with all these people. And folks say that all the time. Like, I could never live with people like that. I mean,
they're not the kind of person you want here.
Right.
But there's a lot of young people. I think, ideally, and this runs into the problem of zoning and building codes and things. Ideally, you have, young people coming in, and originally, at the beginning, they live in a yurt or a camper, and then they, get some scrap lumber, and they start to build, and they build a cob wall, and, they build, using hippie vernacular architecture.
Yeah.
That's how it used to be back in the day.
Yeah.
Before, so now, even though, all of these buildings are permitted, but they are, as you said, engineered.
Mm-hmm.
This is not something that, my 22-year-old son could come and, kind of build his way in. It's still, but look at how a favela works, this is again, the legal infrastructure of North America that
Right.
really makes it hard.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I was curious. I was at a West Coast Intentional Communities conference and sat on panel after panel and lots of workshops with Diana Leaf Christian and I presenting. And she basically said, here's the deal. Either go out and timbuk nowhere and go so far off the grid that you're not going to have an income because you're not going to even, Skype into your meeting or something. But you've got to figure out how to live way out in the hinterland with no attachment to the economy you're trying to get away from in theory, but you're going to still then think about education or something, but you have to make a decision to go far out, or you're going to go anywhere else where there's building codes and policies and laws, and it's going to cost you more time and more money to create your community than a conventional subdivision. And if you're not ready for that, don't start an intentional community or an eco-village. And I was kind of crestfallen, don't say that. Because the conversation here often is stay in your naivety. Believe it's possible. Don't get jaded by the world. Try, because this is an awesome example that we didn't know what we were doing and we did it. So we know it's possible. That path has had a light shone on it. You can see a path there. So maybe other people will do that much work and figure it out. In fact, they should do less work because a bunch has already created a precedent. But to actually see that we have to roll up our sleeves, on every level.
Yeah.
And really throw down.
I wouldn't paint it so black and white, although I kind of agree, as far as the housing prices you were talking about, the people who are interested in this way of living probably have made changes in their lives in other ways that have taken them out of the matrix.
Right.
They no longer have, if they ever did, have a six-figure income. They can't afford $750,000. If they could, that means that they're still being a lawyer or a dentist somewhere, and they're not going to want to live here.
Yeah.
So basically the people who can afford to do it as legally possible in North America don't want to do it. But that's actually not 100% true, because there are people who are leaving the matrix who still have the resources from the matrix who could do it.
Yeah.
So, and they're a minority, a very small minority of all the people who would like to live in a place like this. And really what has to happen is they have to fund other people. The only viable business model for intentional communities is philanthropy, I think.
Right now.
Yeah. And it's and you could say, oh, well, we'll develop a business, we'll become sustainable, self-sufficient, et cetera, build, make tofu or hammocks or something like that, as some do, or run a retreat center or a restaurant or something. But it's actually almost impossible to really do that without becoming a business and not a village.
Yeah.
So I think that these radical social experiments have to be funded by idealistic people who are willing to accept failure and messiness, but who understand that it is so important to create nuclei of another way of life.
Well, I think let's go there, because that is maybe one of the major unsustainable things. If you look at pretty much all the examples, definitely this is a global thing, but we put up leaders just to shoot them down. We have assassinated half of the great leaders of our history. We've crucified them. Something gets projected onto those human beings that then they're no longer really seen for what they're trying to bring. If you look at most intentional communities, they've ousted their founders in brutal and difficult ways. It's not a great job description. Who wants to step up to that roll call? There's not a bunch of people going I got some to lay down and I'm willing to go there, but I'd love if you'd crucify me later for contributing on that level. And that again is back to how do we then sustain getting our villages? Because if that's one of the keys, and yet we shoot down leadership in our desperate struggle of power that we have, we're back to that lack of trust. And now there's a movement afoot to stop being leaders and followers, but to be leaderful and to all stand up as leaders. And do you think that's possible? Do you think we're going to get there in your and I's lifetime?
Well, This is tricky territory. I think that by discarding leadership and hierarchies, we are throwing the baby out with the bathwater, which is a metaphor that's always very vivid for me.
Yeah.
Anyway, I don't think that there's anything wrong with hierarchy. It's been applied in situations that it's not appropriate for, and it's been made permanent, and it's been attached to economic well-being. But in other cultures, David Graeber writes about this actually, about how indigenous people would have egalitarian bands for part of the year, but then sometimes like many would get together, hundreds or thousands would get together in one spot because of whatever reason. There was a big, nut harvest, or the herd was gathering, the antelope or whatever, like everyone would gather all together. And when that happened, they would create temporary hierarchies and rules and enforcers and things like that, which would then dissolve.
Right.
And they wouldn't necessarily recruit the same people every year into positions in those hierarchies. Like being in that hierarchy didn't translate into benefits beyond the purpose for which it served. So you could imagine having some kind of leadership hierarchy that doesn't mean that you also get the best house.
Right. And
doesn't mean that, all it means is that you are exercising a certain role in the community. So that's one thing I think about that. I think a lot of, speaking personally, a lot of my impulse toward not stepping into leadership has more to do with fear of being shamed and disapproved of.
Oh.
And not that I actually don't think I would be effective in that role. So to clarify that and to be honest about that would be a pretty positive step. And then there's an understanding of leadership. And it sounds almost like a cliche, but the leader as servant. The leader, in my view, what a leader should be is somebody who creates opportunities for other people to give their gifts. And if a leader is really in that, he will or she will be trusted and not attacked, because you know that I'm your ally. You know that I'm doing it for you. Here's something that you would be good at. Here's something that you would be self-expressed, and this is your highest excitement.
Yeah.
Like that is a very different kind of leadership than manipulating and coercing you with either money or psychology or physical force to do something you don't really want to do. And that kind of leadership was necessary in the industrial age, when the collective direction of humanity or civilization demanded that many people do things that no sane human being would ever actually want to do. Work in an assembly line or a clerical pool, or be a scrivener or something like that. Like, most work was tedious and degrading. So in order to organize society, it had to be based on some kind of coercion. If not physical coercion, economic coercion. Don't do it or you'll die. I mean, if you don't do it, then you'll die. So as we enter a civilization that wants to be in service to something beautiful and meaningful, that people would gladly do without being coerced, unlike factory work, then different kinds of leadership become appropriate. So eco-villages and intentional communities that are in service to something that is inherently meaningful can experiment with different kinds of leadership that don't depend on coercion, because what they are doing is aligned with what people actually want to be doing. So the structures of this new story understanding of leadership, of creating opportunities for others to give their gifts, the structures for that have not really been developed yet. And that is, I think, an important task, to experiment with those structures, to develop them, to disengage them from traditional power hierarchies that are based on coercion, to deprogram ourselves from the habits of being in those hierarchies, which are habits either of domination or habits of subservience or habits of resistance, habits of defiance, which serve very well in a hierarchy that is anti-life, but do not serve in hierarchies that are in service to life. So we have to then, if you're in a position, I'm sorry I'm talking so long, but if we're in a position in one of those hierarchies, we have to look, okay, how much of my defiance is coming from habits that were very healthy in an oppressive school system and an oppressive society, but are not serving what I truly desire to serve right now.
Right. As fighting for peace sometimes meant because other lives were taken, that people did do that, but does it make sense in the long run to fight for peace? And are we going to turn a corner on actually being able to be peace?
Well, it's like this. It's like maybe you run across this here. Like, no one's going to tell me what to do. I'm free. I'm sovereign. I want to do what I want. Like, that is such a natural response to coercive schooling.
Right.
Where sit down, do your worksheet. Like, that's what a healthy spirit does. But that may not be a healthy response. It's a habit. It becomes a habit. But what if what you're being told to do is to do some function in the permaculture garden that you actually do want to do? But just because someone's telling you to do it, you don't want to do it anymore.
Right.
Like, that is an ego attachment that needs to be looked at. And so for a community to be able to accept positive leadership, there has to be some process that helps people look at those habits. And it's tricky because those processes that help people look at those ego habits can also be used in kind of cult dynamics to break down,
manipulate.
So it's
probably one of the greatest knowings about our eco-village, other than the lawful permaculture, is it's so intense there. It's just a cauldron of you meet your stuff, and when you don't want to do that anymore, you either bounce or you slide out for other reasons. But it's like almost the hardest thing for people it seems to be able to stay in this way of being and stay in our stuff. Like, I've been here for 20 years and it's crafted me and carved me, and I have to just keep showing up with myself. But there's been, maybe once a year, but at least 8 good times where I'm out, I'm done, I've had it, I can't. And so what is it that brings us back? I know my personal story, but I wonder about our collective news story of how do we bring ourselves back? How do we bring ourselves back when you're married to somebody and you had the big fight, and how do you bring ourselves back?
Right. So one thing that keeps you there is that you are part of a vision and part of a story that you believe in. One thing that can help a lot of people stay there is if the community has, and here we're back to a charismatic leader, or somebody who can exercise that function of saying, this is why you're here. And to say it in a way that comes alive in people, that they recognize it as true. Or they hear it yeah, that is why I'm here. That makes it a lot easier to stay, because then when the stuff comes up, you remember, well, I really care about this. This is who I am. This is why I'm here. And so you stick it through. And if you don't have somebody who can articulate, it's not just a verbal skill, but it's to articulate it in the right way at the right moment to the right person, then people are going to peel off all the time, because they're going to be like, well, why am I here? Yeah.
Thank you for this conversation. I know this could go on for years, and who knows how things will transform over the next while. And I think we've all just been called up globally on this 12-year UN report of oh my gosh, we've got to figure this out. We've got a timeline now, and it's curious to see for me how that will inspire or deter or do what with us as a humanity. That will that call us up? Will we call ourselves up? And
that's not going to work. They keep giving us timelines.
Right.
I remember 20 years ago saying that we have a 10-year window.
Right.
Yeah, we don't believe the timelines, and I don't think that particular kind of urgency is going to help us.
Yeah.
But
I have this hope that it's just surely going to be love. That we're going to have enough love for our children, or enough love for the planet, or enough love for what is possible that we'll go there. But I have to say my own belief in that, my own possibility in that wanes at times, especially now.
Yeah. Well, this is just a larger version of what we were just talking about, like a story that keeps us in it. Because not only, are you part of an eco-village, you're also part of a global community of earth healers and change makers. And we do need a story that says that it's not hopeless.
Yeah.
And that holds, if not a map, at least a believable possibility of success that gives meaning to our contributions, which is one thing I contribute to in my work. That's the reason I'm doing it.
Yeah. Thanks for doing that, and thanks for showing up here at our Eco-Village, and look forward to playing it forward tonight.
Yeah. Looking forward to it too.
Yeah.
I'm all warmed up now.
Yay!
Yeah. Cool.